You can support us by subscribing. After what happened last time on the critical borderline between Ukraine and Belarus, will the helpless Russian army give up while Ukraine completely blockades the 1,084 kilometers of the Belarusian border? The huge obstacles that Ukraine has put in front of Russian tanks with the latest stunning moves on the tense border, and the answers to all of these questions are waiting for you in this video that we've carefully prepared. Let's dive into this hot borderline now with the latest accurate and official updates. The land border of Ukraine and Belarus, which is 1,084 kilometers long, is seen as one of the most important strategic and most active border lines of the war. Therefore, every situation experienced here is important enough to change the course of the war between Ukraine and Russia. You can think of it like this. The Russian armed forces has about 30,000 soldiers on standby on the Belarusian-Ukrainian borderline. More than 70,000 soldiers of the Ukrainian army are constantly on patrol around the Volyn, Rivne, Zhytomyr, and Chernihiv regions, and are on the alert for any adverse situation that may suddenly occur on the Belarusian-Ukrainian borderline. Also on this hot borderline, there are more than 8 HIMARS models belonging to the Ukrainian army, one-to-one models of battle tanks, and these models are constantly moved by a rail system carefully prepared by the Ukrainians. Besides these mock-ups, the Ukrainian army has deployed real HIMARS long-range missile systems and main battle tanks and many other military equipment on this critical Belarusian borderline. Here, the latest situation on this borderline is that critical. Now, the Ukrainians have decided to make a brand new breakthrough in Rivne Oblast. The head of the regional administration, Vitaly Koval, stated in his statement that the armed forces of Ukraine began to build anti-tank trenches in the Rivne region as part of the strengthening of the fortifications on the border between Ukraine and Belarus. After this striking statement, the latest work on the Belarusian border continues at full speed. Ukrainians build fortifications and engineering structures every day. They are also digging second-line anti-tank trenches in the area and constructing barriers using special concrete structures and tetrahedrons. In this regard, the Verkhnova Rada of Ukraine announced that it has extended its strip on the border between Russia and Belarus to a depth of 2 kilometers. According to the legislation in force, it is prohibited to say, live, move, trespass, or do any work within the exclusion strip, directly related to the defense or protection of the border itself. The State Border Service of Ukraine has made it clear that this area will be effectively mined. What do you think this critical trench-building step of the Ukrainian army could herald in the coming days? Will there be a warm contact between Belarus and Ukraine on the borderline on the Rivne side of Ukraine? Please do not forget to give your comments on this subject under the video. Did you know that before the construction of this anti-tank trench on the borderline between Ukraine and Belarus, Ukrainian forces secretly made military shipments here, especially after midnight? As we mentioned to you, there were real HIMARS missile systems, main battle tanks, as well as weapon models on the hot Belarusian borderline belonging to the Ukrainian armed forces. But these midnight studies showed that the Ukrainians may be constantly shipping additional military ammunition to this border line. On the Russian side, the striking military preparations of the Ukrainians on the Belarusian borderline are being followed almost silently. It is very curious what the retaliation plan of the Kremlin administration will be in this regard. What orders will Russian leader Vladimir Putin give about the latest situation on the Belarusian border? Will the Russian leader direct part of his army here? While all these questions were on the agenda in Moscow, the Ukrainian armed forces decided to add 17,000 more soldiers to its 70,000-strong force on and around the Belarusian border, including the Kharkiv front. According to the information received from the Belarusian State Border Committee, there are currently 17,000 additional Ukrainian troops on the Belarusian border. In addition to this 70,000 Ukrainian military group, an additional 17,000 military force will serve directly on the Ukraine-Belarusian border. With this move, the Ukrainian forces are showing the Russians a great show of strength by besieging the Belarusian border with 87,000 elite border guards and thousands of armored vehicles. In an emergency or in case of any attack, the Ukrainian army will be able to receive support from its 70,000-strong military force located on the northern and northeastern front lines close to the Belarusian border. In addition, in the triangle of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, there are heated situations in the political arena. There were many rumors that after Belarus showed its territory to be used as a launchpad for the Russian military and the ongoing Russian rockets and drone attacks against Ukraine, Lukashenko would be directly involved in this war against Ukraine. Doing so would further link Lukashenko's wealth to Moscow and open his regime to further isolation and sanctions from the West. On the other hand, if a strong Russian air defense force were to be stationed permanently in Belarus, this would also change Poland's defense account, as Russian Belarusian forces would be able to intercept missiles from Poland from Belarusian soil. In line with all this data, it is clear that Russia's strategic goal is to maintain a permanent Russian military presence in Belarus. This essentially lays the groundwork for the realization of the remaining strategic goals of gaining political and economic control of the country. It also highlights the need for Russia to increase security stability while besieging the military operation in Ukraine. That is, above all, the need for some protection from NATO countries. However, Belarusian leader Lukashenko has always emphasized the independence of the country in the past, despite his closeness to Russia, especially in recent days, contrary to all these plans of Putin. Despite tensions between the two leaders, Belarusian military installations have been used since the beginning of the war to fly Russian air sorties and launch Russian cruise missiles and drones into Ukraine. In this regard, the Ukrainian authorities are cautious about the possibility or inevitability of fighting the two invaders. Andriy Chernyak, spokesman for the Ukrainian military intelligence agency GUR, stated that they understand that Belarus's efforts are to support Russia and avoid participating in the war, but they also know how much pressure Russia puts on them. In this regard, the most striking example occurred again in the past weeks. There have also been a few impressive incidents where Belarus has signed its desire to remain neutral, somewhat far from being an active participant in the war in Ukraine. A missile belonging to the Ukrainian army trying to intercept a Russian missile landed in Belarus. The incident did not cause any disruption to Belarusian state propaganda, which would otherwise have easily turned it into an excuse for aggression. Lukashenko even publicly thanked Ukraine for not succumbing to Western pressure for Ukraine to respond to Belarus. After this striking statement, the tension between Belarus and Russia gradually increased. Recently, an internal strategy document leaked from Russian leader Vladimir Putin's administration office turned the world agenda upside down and caused a critical process to begin between the two countries. This document laid out a detailed plan of how Russia planned to seize full control over neighboring Belarus over the next decade, under the pretext of a union between the two countries. Furthermore, the document outlined in detail the creeping annexation of an independent but illiberal European nation by political, economic, and military means by Russia, which was in an active state of war in its attempt to conquer Ukraine with overwhelming force. According to the published document, Russia's ultimate goal is to establish the so-called Union State of Russia and Belarus by 2030 at the latest. The striking document emphasizes the provision of a coordinated foreign and defense policy and trade and economic cooperation of Belarusian laws with the laws of the Russian Federation, on the basis of the priority of Russian interests and the predominant influence of the Russian Federation in the socio-political, commercial and economic, scientific and educational, cultural and information fields. In fact, when we look at this issue from a broad perspective, we can easily see Russia's desire to pacify Belarus, as well as a control attempt on the territory of Ukraine. When we look at the current Russian-Belarusian diplomatic relations, their connections on the Ukraine war, and this important document that has emerged, we encounter this striking fact. The most important detail in this regard is what Belarus will do in the coming days. Despite all of this, will the Belarusian government continue to serve as a battlefield for Russia, or will it take a neutral stance? We will see this together. Thank you for watching us.